Hi guys, welcome back. It's Nick here, back with the Transport game series. Today we're going to take another look at our terrain generation and chunk management scripts. Where we left off, we just started generating our terrain objects, and we had a few issues with them, so we're going right into the code. The first thing I noticed is we actually don't have colliders on our terrain set up properly, so we've added them, but we actually need to give them data to use. So just adding on to this add component line, I'm going to do terrain data to set the data used by the collider, and it needs to be the same as the terrain data used by the terrain. So I'm going to do chunk graphics index I.terrain data, and that finishes setting up our collider. And the final thing we need to do is set our terrain to be the correct size and resolution. So we'll do once again chunk graphics at I.terrain data size, and make that equal to a new vector 3. So you need x, y, and z. We already know x and z are these chunk size x, chunk size y. So chunk size x, leave space for y, and then chunk size y. And then in the middle, I'm just going to put a flat 600. Just because that seems to be standard for most terrain objects. It's the default given in the terrain we have here. And this one also has a height map resolution of 513. For our one, this is slightly above the terrain width and length. For our one, I'm just going to set it to around half the chunk size. So I'm going to do chunk graphics terrain data height map resolution, and I'm going to set that equal to, and this is just an integer value as you can see here when I hover. I'm going to set it to chunk size x divided by 2, and I'm going to cast that to an integer just so it rounds down correctly. Just add the semicolon there. So that should be just about it for setting up our terrains. I'm going to give this a play and hope we don't have any errors and compile correctly. Okay, so we have these chunks set up. They actually seem to be way bigger than we need though. Chunk 0 is a terrain width 1024 by 1024. That isn't quite right, but the height is correct at 60 at 600. Just go and double check that code is correct again. It definitely says chunk size x and chunk size y, which are 256 each. Let's just have another look at that result here. And our height map resolution is 129, which is correct. So I'm not quite sure why our width and height are actually the incorrect size. Perhaps they are dealt with in multiples of 4, in which case let's try dividing our chunk size by 4 and seeing if that yields the correct one this time. I'm not particularly familiar with terrain, so this is quite new to me at the moment. Usually when you build a terrain you just do it all in the editor, and actually doing it in runtime is a bit unusual. So let's play this now. Okay, it seemed to like that in multiples of 4. I'm not quite sure the reason for that. I'm sure there is a reason for that, but now we have the correct size of our chunks, and if I move it, I'm sure we can see that. And the next thing we need to do is position them correctly. And this is going to be dealt with by a generation script. So you see this, from this example you can actually see the chunk is positioned, or a terrain rather, is positioned from the center. Okay, although the terrain is positioned from the center, it seems as though it takes care of that itself, because 0, 0 in the world coordinates is down here, whereas the chunk has positioned the corner into the right place. So it seems like we won't have to take that into account in our script. what we just need to do is position the terrains in the correct place where they need to go. So let's just go down to this generate script. I'll fold up the load chunk from memory. So generate chunk, what we'll do here is just position the terrain in the correct place for now. Later on we'll deal with how to sculpt the terrain into the correct shapes and add textures and things like that. Okay, so we have the index, which is how we're going to determine the position, but we also need to know which terrain we're dealing with. So I'm going to add a new integer here called I'm going to call it say graphic index, just to distinguish it, and this one coordinate index. Just to see the difference between those two ones. There we go, like that. And I'll just update the name in the other places I've used it. Okay, so when we've got the graphical index, we can work out which terrain we're generating. And what we want to do is just move it to the right place. So we'll make a new game object called terrain geo for game object. And then here we'll say that is equal to chunk graphics at the graphic index dot game object, and then we'll I realise I've misspelt terrain there. There we go. And then we need to move this relative to the coordinate index we've been given. So what that will be is terrain geo dot transform dot position equals, and we'll create a new vector3, and the x is going to be chunk size x multiplied by coordinate index dot x. The y position is going to be 0. Oh, sorry, I've typed vector2, it should be a vector3. And finally, we want this, but for the y sizes and coordinates. So it's going to be chunk size y multiplied by coordinate index times y. And the final thing we need to do is update where we call this function. So generate chunk is called up here, I believe. Sorry, in the load chunk from memory. So this needs to know the index, which I'm also going to rename as coordinate index. To change all the places that's used, and I'm also going to add the integer of graphical index there. So we can pass that on to the generate chunk function. And then we also need to tell the load chunk from memory the graphical index, which is just the I from this loop, so it represents the I as from the array that we were working with. So I think this is just about ready to test. That means our terrain should be moved into a 9x9 grid. Let's just deal with the error we've got here, which is unexpected symbol loaded chunks. I expect that means, yes, I have forgotten to set a colon there. So hopefully we won't get any more errors. Okay, so we didn't get any more errors. Let's just give this a play to double check that that actually works. We've got a null reference, which is our favourite type of error. It's at line 192. Okay, so when we first start, this chunk graphics thing doesn't seem to be set up correctly. It seems to be still pulling a null reference. So we'll just scroll up and make sure that chunk graphics is set up correctly. We do have the loop running here. Perhaps we should add a debug statement just before this line, saying debug.log, and we'll just log chunk graphics at the graphics index. So yes, that is in fact null, which is incorrect. So it looks like our array isn't being populated correctly. So chunk graphics at I is equal to the GameObject.add component terrain, and we do all the setup for that. So I'm not quite sure what's causing this here. Let me just play one more time. Okay, we're actually getting that error before we've done the start method. Oh, I see. It's because we're calling the on-camera move function before we are initializing the chunk graphics. So if we just take that call and paste it underneath, then we should remove that error. So we hit play. Hopefully we won't have any problems. Okay, there we go. So those issues have been solved, and you can see we have a nice little grid of terrains. Hopefully as we move around, those terrains should move to encompass us as we move the camera. So the terrains over there will relocate, as you can see, to here to form the new areas. We seem to have a gap in the center. These terrains don't seem to have moved, which might be an issue with our generate function. But for now we can see the effect we've had. Actually I can't move that far because of the limit on the camera, which is not something I've taken into account yet. But at least we can see the what we're working on here. I'm just going to remove that debug statement we added a moment ago so that it doesn't clog up the console, this one here. And I think that's probably enough for now. As you can see, we're still not perfect, but we're very much getting close to what we're looking for in terms of our chunk system. All that's required now is to actually generate the height maps and textures for our terrains, and we have essentially an infinite world generation system, which is going to set apart this game from some of the typical simulation categories where the world is limited in size. You have a set area. I know those areas are getting bigger and bigger, but having an infinite world space to explore is a much better concept. So thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.